Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our first New Leaf Opportunities campaign event. Tonight's event will outline the campaign's aims and objectives, and we'll be hearing from our campaign partners and their areas of expertise. My name is Katja Kowalski, and I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Officer at Volteface. I run our European Cannabis Advocacy Network, and I also write our Global Cannabis Briefing, which is a report that we send to our funders and supporters of Volteface. It's a monthly report that contains all the major cannabis news, developments, and policy analysis broken down by country. The New Leaf Opportunities campaign is a campaign focused on the economic benefits, innovations, and investment opportunities that medical cannabis and CBD can bring to the UK in 2021. The coalition is expertise in law, markets, science, policy, consultancy, and innovation, and the campaign consists of Volteface, Ince legal firm, Kanabo Research, Spinnaker Opportunities, Ciitech, and Hanway Associates. Now, to start the evening off, I'll give a brief overview of the importance of investment in cannabis, touching on why innovation is important and why we must welcome CBD in the space. I'll then hand over to Lily Temperton, who will be giving an opening talk on the innovation opportunities that exist in the UK now. And then we'll move on to our panelists for today's event, and we've got an intention of holding a Q&A session at the end. So throughout the event, if you've got any questions, just feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to as many as we can at the end. Now, to say that 2020 was a challenging year is certainly an understatement, but as we begin to feel the effects of Brexit, and whilst COVID continues to bring economic insecurity, it's essential that we look towards the promising opportunities. And cannabis is undoubtedly one of those. Despite it being an unprecedented year that we're all happy is over, 2020 definitely had some incredible breakthroughs for cannabis reform and the industry, with positive developments from the EU CBD ruling to the UN recognizing the medical value of cannabis. So this news definitely demonstrates that cannabis has in fact come of age, and its momentum will undoubtedly continue in 2021. With medical cannabis companies allowed to list on the London Stock Exchange, the UK has definitely shown that it's ready for business. And as a new, exciting and emerging industry, there are clear economic benefits to cannabis investment. The UK CBD market is currently worth £300 million and is estimated to be worth £1 billion in the next 5 years. These figures highlight the birth of a prosperous economic sector, but it's important to highlight that this isn't just big corporations that will be benefiting from expansion. The benefits stretch to the creation of a substantial amount of jobs, tax revenue, and economic recovery. The CBD and medical cannabis industry requires a wide range of roles with a variety of skill sets, and given the wave of recession we're currently experiencing with Brexit and COVID, such job creation must definitely be welcomed. And aside from the overwhelming economic argument, I think it's worth touching on how investment will bring innovation. Innovation improves product quality, expands access, and advances our understanding of cannabis. And it's necessary that consumers have access to appropriate products, catering to their specific needs. And we shouldn't see products in the cannabis sector as a one-size-fits-all phenomenon, as subtle differences in administration and content can make a big difference. Innovation can expand variety, and this gives consumers a greater amount of choice. Now, alongside this, innovation advances our understanding of cannabis through scientific research. Industry growth expands our knowledge, and greater knowledge expands the industry. It's a two-way process, and investment benefits innovation. The UK holds a reputation for excellence in the scientific sector. And to remain at the forefront of this, we must welcome the ability to innovate in the cannabis sector and continue to lead the way. Innovation is also a means of preventing larger players from monopolizing the market, and this leaves room for craft products to explore interesting aspects to cannabis. And by welcoming investment, we're giving consumers a range of products to choose from, breeding diversity in the field with unique and varied products. Thus, innovation as a result of investment is not something that should be feared, instead something to be embraced. And with that said, it's imperative that the industry does approach innovation through putting consumers and patients' needs first. Now, cannabis is here to stay. Individuals clearly want access to these products, and by accepting this and viewing this positively, it will lead to a more vibrant industry. And as an emerging product that continues to grow in popularity, CBD presents some exciting potential for innovation. The cannabis industry has become more dynamic as a result of CBD, and CBD might be one of the greatest things to happen to the industry through normalizing cannabis and educating the public on the plant. CBD's removed a lot of the deep entrenched stigma that some associate with cannabis, and this has helped to rebrand cannabis to be associated within the health and wellness sphere. And this has been achieved relatively successfully. We've seen significant growth in the number of UK CBD users. 6 million now use it to some extent, and this is bound to grow. And the impressive consumer number is largely thanks to CBD allowing the industry to attract a much larger and more varied consumer base. And this demonstrates that investment in innovation can continue to break down stigma surrounding cannabis, and it's essential that this continues. The European cannabis industry, which is largely led by CBD, leaves us in a strong place for innovation and opportunities for market growth. It also leaves us in a unique position to allow for diverse and promising uses, both medically and health-wise. Investment will benefit innovation and technology development, further improving the consumer experience and helping us to find new creative ways to use these products. And it's necessary that we view this positively. I'll now hand over to Lily, who will give us an overview of some of the most exciting opportunities for innovation in the UK.
Thanks, Katia. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Lily Temperton, and I work as a consultant at Hanway Associates. We're a leading European cannabis advisory firm based here in London. I work with clients across medical, wellness, industrial hemp, and recreational sectors, helping them to understand regulations, the competitive landscape, and to shape their market entry strategies. I've also written industry reports for our professional network, First Wednesdays, including the European medical cannabis ecosystem. At Hanway, we also provide creative services, M&A strategy, and licensing support. We provide cultivation expertise through Crop17, our joint venture with Savills, the major property company, expert glasshouse engineers, Cambridge HOK, and specialists in cannabis cultivation security, Sabrosa Group. Today, I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of some of the most exciting opportunities for innovation in the UK, resulting in increased investment in the cannabis space. And I'm primarily going to be focusing on the medical cannabis opportunity. I think it's important for us to differentiate between medical cannabis and the wellness market, as while producers of these products often overlap, patients and consumers ultimately do have different needs and require tailored strategies. Both sectors are moving from the fringe to the mainstream and have an urgent requirement for access to high quality products. Medical patients have limited access through the current legal channels, and there are 1.4 million self-medicators in the UK alone. On the other hand, wellness consumers are facing challenges from inconsistent product quality and labelling, causing confusion and often a sense that CBD doesn't work. So both sectors need innovation and regulatory support if they're going to develop to their full potential. Last September, the UK Financial Conduct Authority authorised medical cannabis companies to float on the London Stock Exchange. I think this is a great opportunity for UK companies, and we need to carry on building this positive momentum if we want to encourage our domestic industries to grow. If we don't embrace this, the opportunity is going to go elsewhere. We've already seen companies starting to list on the Scandinavian exchanges, and in turn, this is only going to impact UK patients and UK consumers. Today, I'm going to be touching on 3 key opportunities that I see for innovation: agritech, healthcare, and consumer goods. The UK is home to the world's single largest legal cannabis cultivation site, 18 hectares at British Sugar's Wissington facility. And the number of high THC licenses issued by the Home Office has nearly doubled over the past year. Increased investment and uptake of cannabis cultivation is going to allow technologies to develop that are not only useful for cannabis, but can be transferred to other industries, like controlled environment agriculture. Cannabis is high margin and it's bred to be grown indoors, which makes it the ideal crop to trial and perfect new agritech methods like vertical farming, which will help to kickstart the UK's cannabis industry, but also to lay the groundwork for food production processes of the future. The current EU Common Agricultural Policy Scheme issues subsidy payments to UK farmers based on acreage, but this is gradually being phased out over the coming years. As such, the UK has now got an opportunity to begin granting subsidies based on green credentials, helping to develop future-proof agritech solutions to help drive us towards a green economic recovery. We think the UK could be an ideal hub for investment in plant science, agritech, and plant genetics, boosting jobs in our dwindling agricultural sectors, helping to develop viable biocomposites from industrial hemp, and optimizing genetics for medical use. And in turn, we can bring medical and wellness supply chains closer to home, helping to ensure reliable supply. Moving on to healthcare, comparing the UK and Denmark, which both expanded access to medical cannabis back in 2018. In Denmark, regulators are supporting the cannabis industry to produce the much needed data on clinical efficacy, to develop best practices, and to create pharmaceutical quality formulations. In part, this has happened through public-private partnerships and state-supported startups. In just 2 years of Denmark's pilot scheme, over 400 million Canadian dollars entered the country from international investments and helped to create around 600 jobs. The UK urgently needs to embrace medical cannabis if we want to maintain our international reputation within the life science and pharmaceutical industries. We've already got a heritage for R&D and pharma development, but we need to transfer this to cannabis if we want to compete on a global level. Investments into the medical cannabis sector are going to drive the development of clinical data requested by NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which sets the guidelines for what medical cannabis can be prescribed for through the NHS. And in turn, this is going to enable further patient access. Investment will also enable operators to roll out doctor education at scale, to develop product formats like tablets with wider appeal to the general public, and also to develop devices that provide consistent dosing and track patient outcomes. And finally, touching on the consumer product side, investment is going to enable companies to develop vastly improved products that are not only more effective, but are tailored to the consumer's specific need and are more appealing to the public as a whole. The UK is already home to the largest CBD market in Europe, and with our clear route to compliance through the separate novel foods process, I don't think the time has ever been better to invest in the area. The fledgling CBD industry provides us with a great opportunity for entrepreneurship. Most brands have been launched by startups and small to medium-sized companies. But also, FMCG companies now have the confidence to invest in cannabinoid product development due to the regulatory clarity here in the UK. And I think it's really important that we don't shy away from this, as it's going to kickstart a new wave of more effective, readily available, and ultimately safer products for consumers. Nestle, Colgate, and Constellation Brands have all made investments into cannabis in some form or another. And the British tobacco venture company, Imperial Brands, invested 123 million into the Canadian cannabis producer Oxley in 2019, partly to develop safer cannabinoid vape products. Increasing R&D and investment is going to drive innovations in the consumer goods space, like nanotechnology, allowing greater bioavailability. And it's also going to enable targeted products for specific need states. For example, Days CBD-infused tampons and 4-5 supplements for athletes. It's also going to help develop new delivery methods to give consumers the confidence to accurately control their dose. So to wrap up, it's so important that we harness this opportunity that cannabis brings to the UK's patients, consumers, and our wider economy as a whole, and that we encourage the development of sustainable, well-funded cannabis industries. And on that note, I'm going to introduce Sam Bowman, our keynote speaker for the evening. Sam is a policy expert and previously the executive director of the Adam Smith Institute, a world-leading neoliberal think tank and lobbying group. He's also a co-founder of the entrepreneurship think tank, the Entrepreneur Network. Tonight, he's going to be speaking to us about entrepreneurship, innovation, and the new opportunities as a result of making the UK a hub for CBD and medical cannabis.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that introduction and for that really, really interesting talk before. I really have to say, even a year in, I'm still not used to giving talks over Zoom, and I really miss the kind of buzz of giving a talk with an audience, especially because at Volteface, I think I have never once spoken at Volteface without being heckled multiple times during the process of my speech, and I feel really like I'm missing out by not having a heckler tonight, but hopefully soon we'll be back into a land of heckling. So when we think about innovation, there are two big camps. There are the kind of camps who see innovation as coming from the top. This is the kind of mission-led camp. And Mariana Mazzucato, the economist, is the most prominent example of this view. And this says that there are grand challenges facing the human race that we as a society can solve with combined ingenuity. So things like curing COVID or beating climate change are things that we can solve in the same way that we solve the problem of going to the moon. It's a question of resources, willpower, and kind of bringing everybody together to solve these grand problems. But the other camp sees innovation as something that happens by accident, spontaneously, often solving problems we didn't know that we had. The innovations that led to the iPhone and to the internet had roots in things like military technology and the sort of top-down approach to innovation, but nobody could possibly have imagined what they would have led to. Famously, penicillin, which we still use to this day, was discovered completely by accident. And there is no way a kind of government project to develop something like penicillin would have led to what we ended up with. And that second camp sees the conditions that lead to innovation as being absolutely key and the things that we should be thinking about most. And those are things like support for research, support for entrepreneurs, financial support, making sure they have safety nets so that if they fail, their lives aren't ruined. Things like barriers to entry that are both in the market and created by regulation, and think that government's role is to support all these things as much as possible and to try to remove those regulations and those barriers to entry where it's appropriate. And I think there's probably something to both of those views. I think that it probably is pretty clear that we needed a vaccine to COVID as soon as we knew about COVID, and a kind of grand effort that really spanned almost every drug company and lots of other companies as well was the best way of solving that problem. But there are loads of other innovations that make our lives good that come from this spontaneous accidental approach. And that's the frame in which I see prohibitions on the use and marketing and development of cannabis and cannabis-related products. Because I see it as not just an issue of one of individual liberty or harm reduction, even though those are really, really important parts of the debate, but as one of innovation and as of cannabis prohibitions as being a barrier to innovation. And those kinds of innovations really are littered throughout history. You know, a simple, obvious example is radio spectrum, which in most places is incredibly tightly regulated, and in often huge parts of radio spectrum are just given to the military, and there's no debate, no question about that the military can use this radio spectrum. But as Western countries and other countries have liberalized their radio spectrum, freeing more and more of it up for commercial civilian uses, it turns out we're really good at using radio spectrum for really interesting and surprising things. I mean, Wi-Fi is an example, 4G, 5G are all examples. And countries like the UK that were leading on liberalizing spectrum and allowing private companies to use radio spectrum in innovative ways are the ones that were able to build a really sophisticated network of wireless connectivity. But actually the country that I've been to that has the most impressive wireless network is not a developed country, it's a developing one called Guatemala, which surprisingly, perhaps, has the most liberal approach to radio spectrum in the world. And in the absolute poorest parts of one of the poorest countries in Latin America, the Wi-Fi or the 4G connectivity is better there than it is in central London. It's pretty astonishing. And the follow-on innovations that come from that wireless connectivity are absolutely jaw-dropping. I mean, everybody knows their phones are kind of the centers of their lives. I run a business from my phone. I've spent the last week resisting the urge to buy stock in GameStop. I really wish I had not resisted that urge at the beginning of the week, now that it's something like risen in value by 20 times. But on a more micro level, the innovations that have come from surprising places, things like Cellucotton, which was invented in World War I to staunch battlefield wounds. But pretty quickly, nurses realized that it was a cheap, absorbent material that had other uses, and so sanitary pads were born. Radars, which used microwave transmitters to detect enemy aircraft in World War II, eventually led to the microwave oven that I used to reheat too many meals after nights out, and so on. And pharmaceutical is obviously filled with discoveries like this. One of my favorites is methylene blue, which started as a dye in the 19th century and began to be used as an anti-malarial. And chloroquine is a derivative of that. It's just as effective and it doesn't turn you blue. So it's really the advantages of this follow-on innovation are really spectacular. So when we think about the cannabis market, I think that the big mistake that many people who are not in the market and who don't think about the issue in terms of innovation make is to forget that we're only at the beginning of the journey of innovating around cannabis. The only applications for cannabis that we know about are the ones that people have been able to do while it has been effectively illegal in almost all of the world, or so heavily regulated that it's been really, really difficult to innovate in interesting ways. And what I wonder, and my kind of question and challenge for the UK is, could the UK be the first country to allow true innovation, commercial and scientific, to take place in the world of cannabis, and in the branching kind of tree that comes from this sort of original plant? So I want to talk about a few areas where we might see innovations to follow on from what Lily talked about, and then to talk about why I think it's really, really useful for the UK to be the center of this. The most obvious area for innovation around cannabis is harm reduction. Before the COVID vaccine, probably the biggest life-saving invention of the 21st century was the e-cigarette. Again, this was not something that was dreamt up in a government department. There wasn't a huge government grant to develop the e-cigarette. In fact, most of the big pharmaceutical companies that tried to develop alternatives to tobacco created not terrible, but ones that most smokers did not consider to be valuable substitutes for tobacco, even though they were vastly, vastly safer. But when the e-cigarette came along, many smokers began to think, you know what, this is good enough, and this is so much safer than smoking tobacco that I'm willing to switch. I'm going to do a huge favor to myself and to my family, but I still get the pleasure of smoking nicotine and having the kind of nicotine joys that smokers enjoy. And I wonder, what are the equivalents in cannabis? Norman Lamb, we saw when he visited Canada, tried a legal tincture on camera, and he apparently enjoyed it, didn't feel stoned, but had a great sleep. Apparently, there are many older people are preferring to try tinctures like this and other non-combustible ways of ingesting cannabis to go to sleep, to address pain, and using CBDs in various related ways as well. And what that tells me is that even at the margins that are so constrained by regulation right now in countries like the US and Canada, where cannabis is semi-legal, people are beginning to innovate and experiment and finding that, for example, cannabis might be a really powerful replacement for opiates and opioids for some people with pain problems. If we can really let the market rip in terms of innovating, if we can really bring the same R&D budget that thinks about how to develop Amazon's warehouses in the most efficient way possible to new ways of delivering cannabis in ways that remove some of the side effects and allow people to have as controlled a use of the product as possible, we could be looking at a really impressive and interesting and exciting way of delivering cannabis to people and allowing them to treat themselves that gives them options other than existing medicines and existing drugs with all of the problems that they have. The hemp industry, the CBD industry, as we've just heard, is huge in the UK already. It's worth £300 million already. It's likely to grow significantly over the next few years. And one really simple regulation that could be changed is to allow farmers to not burn 80% of the crop. Let them refine all of the CBD from the plant rather than just using the stalk and the stems. I'm also told that hemp is a net zero carbon building material. Now, I'm really interested in the kind of market-based ways of solving climate change. I think that it's one of these things that probably will have 1,000 solutions rather than one big solution. And if we can find ways of solving the housing crisis by cheaply building high-quality new homes and doing so in a way that doesn't increase carbon emissions, that could be a really, really nice market-driven solution to 2 problems or even 3 problems at once. But really, the potential innovations that will come from cannabis and from the cannabis industry are things that nobody, or maybe a few people watching, have ever thought of. What we really need to grasp, and what I think government needs to grasp, is that we only know the tip of the iceberg in terms of the things that we can do with this. And there are 500 components to cannabis, roughly. We've discovered and isolated about 104. There's a huge amount more research to be done. There are potentially drug applications for weight loss, tackling fatty liver disease, a hangover cure, perhaps, which I'd love. There are so many potential applications we don't know about yet that experimentation and market-based innovation could drive and could allow us to really, really improve a lot of people's lives. And post-COVID, because you must, it is the law, if you are ever giving a speech at the moment, you must give a COVID angle to it, because otherwise people just switch off. Post-COVID, the demand, I think, will be for more people to live from home, work from home, and thus socialize at home. I think there will be probably some movement away from socializing in pubs and city centers and moving towards a more decentralized way of living our lives, which potentially could create an increased demand for new ways of spending time with your friends at home. Alcohol is one way of doing that. Smoking cannabis is one way of doing that. But there may be delivery mechanisms and ways of taking parts of cannabis that we don't know about that could allow people to spend more time with their friends in a nice way in a changed world once we've conquered this virus. So why is this important for the UK? I mean, everything I've just said really is true for everyone in the entire world. When we think about innovation, one of the underappreciated facets of how it works is the importance of geography and proximity. Why is Silicon Valley where Silicon Valley is? There are an infinite number of places it could be. The most compelling story I've heard is that there's a kind of path dependency in the history of Silicon Valley from Stanford University becoming one of the centers of military research and applications of science in the military, to setting up a business park called Stanford Industrial Park, to the setting up of Xerox Park, which is a kind of subsection of Stanford Industrial Park, which became in the kind of post-war era really one of the centers of research and innovation in the world. Developed things like the personal computer, the graphical user interface, laser printers. Most of the things that led on to the Silicon Valley revolution began in Xerox Park. People like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs were inspired by this. Steve Jobs even said that Xerox, which unfortunately for a number of reasons didn't turn into the IBM or the Microsoft of its era, Steve Jobs said that it easily could have. And obviously the companies that did become those things were influenced geographically and drawn to this area and promoted and able to exchange ideas with each other because they were physically close to each other. This was spillovers from the innovations that took place in Xerox Park and in Stanford, and these spillovers to the pure research that was going on at Stanford University, and to the people who were coming out of Stanford University with an understanding of computers, of electronics, of other forms of science, that led to this cluster emerging in Silicon Valley that took on this unstoppable momentum and turned into what it is today. And it's only now, as Silicon Valley and the area around the San Francisco Bay has such unbelievable problems, kind of nothing to do with Silicon Valley really, other than they're not building enough houses and crime is really high, that people are beginning to desperately try to leave Silicon Valley and go to places like Austin and Miami. And the difficulty they're having, the fact that it isn't so simple to just come up and move, shows the importance of path dependency and the importance of the geographical proximity to everybody else. If they could all leave at once, maybe that would be viable, but they can't. So they're stuck with each other in the place where it started. So in the UK, we've had a really, really troubling economic stagnation for the last 13 years. In the years between 1980 and 2007, productivity in the UK grew at 2.3% per year, which is a pretty good clip. But in the years between 2008 and 2018, productivity grew at 0.4%. So to put that in perspective, if productivity had grown at the same rate between 2008 and 2020 before the COVID pandemic, as it did in the years between 1980 and 2007, then we'd be 25% richer today, or at least at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, than we were at that point. So that lost productivity growth has come because we're not innovating enough, and we're not producing companies that are innovative enough and productive enough that they can deliver products that are successful on the world stage. And we have a few interesting industries like finance, but as I've mentioned, look at things like GameStop to see how rapidly finance is changing, and look at events like Brexit to see how difficult it may be for existing industries like finance to struggle. But I think there is some reason to be optimistic. Although the UK, I think, has dealt with COVID pretty terribly, one thing that we've been remarkably good at is rapidly approving new vaccines, testing them to make sure they're absolutely safe, and we're getting there, delivering them. We're not as good as some countries, but we're a hell of a lot better than a lot of others. So there is a potential for regulatory nimbleness and for an ability to turn around quickly on a dime. And if we recognize that cannabis is a potential industry where we have existing strengths in biomedical sciences, we have an existing strength in rapid approval of new biomedical devices and of new drugs, and if we recognize that building the cluster, building the center of innovation here first could allow us to have the Silicon Valley of cannabis, then we might be set up in a surprisingly good way for what could turn into a very, very important global industry. Already is extremely important, but could be significantly more important than anybody realizes. So to sum up, my message is, innovation often comes from surprising places, and we often don't expect that a battlefield dressing wound will change the lives of women around the world for centuries to come. Cannabis may be the new thing, the new innovation, the new frontier in innovation that we need. And I think the UK now is at such a juncture, having had such a difficult 10 or even really 15 years, that something new has to be tried, and maybe cannabis is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for that really fascinating and super positive talk. Yeah, thank you so much. I'd now like to introduce our next panel speakers. I've got Andy Morrison and Avihu Tamir, and they'll be discussing innovations and investment opportunities in the field. Avihu Tamir is a cannabis entrepreneur with experience in multiple cannabis ventures, founder of Teva Nature and the leading vaporizer company in Israel. And in 2016, he founded Kanabo Research and has been serving as the CEO of the company. Andy Morrison is the chairman of Spinnaker Opportunities, PLC, a listed investment vehicle on the LSE, London Stock Exchange, working to bring medical cannabis and CBD to the LSE. Now, if we start with Avihu, regarding kind of innovations in technology, as an expert in the field with extensive experience in cannabis innovations, could you tell us a little bit about the exciting innovations which currently exist for both medical patients and CBD consumers?
Yeah, first of all, nice to meet you, all of you. I'm speaking from Tel Aviv, but yeah, in this Zoom generation, I think it's very global. I think Sam touched about some interesting things. First of all, I totally agree that when we're talking about regulation is a hurdle for innovation, this is exactly that. And we can start maybe with an example and our work. We have a research lab in Israel, and Israel is one of the places where it's, let's say that the obstacles for research of cannabis are much lower than most places. Clinical trials and research of cannabis is happening in Israel since the 60s. And still, you see how regulation is holding back a lot of the potential of the innovation. And it's from very small things. You need to import THC, medical cannabis. There's a whole process of getting an import license. An export license from the exporter, each of them can take several days or weeks, and the whole process together for each process like this can really take a while. So that's exactly what Sam have just mentioned. We see it in our company as like a real challenge that is happening every day. And potential, or I would say interesting things, and there's many, I will touch just a few. One of the most interesting innovation that is happening now is we like to call it beyond the THC and CBD. So minor cannabinoids. Minor cannabinoids is something that is becoming more and more a focus of the industry. And it's happening both in the medical side and the wellness CBD side. We see now a lot of focus on CBG and CBN, and one of the more interesting and new, I would say, cannabinoid that you're looking at is Delta 8. It's a cannabinoid that is psychoactive, but it's actually not production of THC, but rather from CBD. So as you can see, even on regulation side, it makes things much more complicated than were before. Another interesting innovation that we see in the market is around the bioavailability. So if we're looking on cannabis as a whole, especially in oral consumption, bioavailability is perhaps the #1 challenge. Oral consumption of THC or CBD is a fraction of smoking, and still we see a lot of people choosing that path of consumption, this delivery method. So new innovation types are a lot of nanotechnology innovations and solutions. How do you get the material passing the brain-blood barrier as soon as possible, as fast as possible? So you have onset time, shortening it as much as possible, and at the same time higher bioavailability as well. One of the interesting innovation I've seen just in the last few weeks is a technology of taking cannabis oils, any oils, and making it a powder. So you're getting a powder that have almost 50% of pure extract of cannabis oil. That means that you can, for the first time, take a whole full spectrum cannabis extract and integrate it to almost any product. If it's drinks, if it's edibles, so enjoying both this nanotechnology and the capability to work with full oils and extracts. So yeah, these are the interesting ones I can share.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, the kind of minor cannabinoid stuff I find I think is really interesting. Now, Kanabo Research has developed the world's first medical cannabis extract-filled vaporizing device. Could you tell us a bit about the importance of such a product for patients?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the challenges that, and you don't have this challenge in a recreational market, but you do have it in a medical market, is this fear or just being uncomfortable for physician to prescribe a smoking method. It doesn't matter how much you will convince a physician or the medical establishment to prescribe a medicine via smoking. It's not their preferred intake method, let's say that. But in the same time, it doesn't matter which market you're looking at. When you're looking at medical cannabis markets, majority of patients are smoking their cannabis. So it's the same in Germany, in Israel, and even in the UK. That's a program that I think 1.5 years, 2 years old. And a program that started specifically with focusing on tinctures. And today you have almost 70 to 80% of patients buying flowers. So it's, the market is, on one hand, patients are asking for one method, and on the other hand, you have physicians that are obviously preferring the methods that they know. And Kanabo is coming to really close this gap. How do we bring a medical device that can produce a specific meter dose amount every time, and gives the physician the capability to actually prescribe a dose. So that's new when you're talking about inhalation. And that, I believe, the breakthrough here, or the tipping point here, is making the medical establishment feel comfortable, and at the same time giving patients the same effect of smoking.
Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting and super groundbreaking within the medical cannabis field, having such a product. Now, as this device will be the first of its kind in Europe, has it been challenging to develop for it to fit with European regulations?
Yeah, so I think everything in regulation is challenging, and probably Robert will tell us in a few minutes how challenging is that, because it's always taking longer than you think. So that's just a tip for everyone. Always assume the worst, because it will probably take more time. What we're doing is the first in the world. taking technology that is based on vaporization technology and doing a process of education to the regulator that this can be a medical device. Because in their mindset, what the regulator will think is that, is this electronic cigarettes? Because if it is an electronic cigarettes, it's obviously not a medical device. And so that was a long process. We needed to rebuild from bottom up the technology, the dosing, the material has to be medical grade, and the production has to be a production in a medical grade facility, so a medical device facility. And if you're trying to think how many facilities like this there out there in the world, you will probably count them on one hand. And so all of these together were quite challenging. But I think this is why it will be so disruptive for the market.
Absolutely. I think it will definitely be worth it, and it's a really important innovation. Now, kind of moving more to the investment side of things, there's some very exciting developments with Kanabo becoming the first medical cannabis company to list on the London Stock Exchange. Andy, how did Spinnaker Opportunities decide to focus on medical cannabis, and where are you currently in the transaction?
Thank you, Katya, and good evening, everybody. Well, Spinnaker listed as a cash shell investment vehicle back in 2017, so almost 4 years ago. And we initially focused our acquisition search in the energy and industrial sectors. And we started seeing opportunities in the cannabis sector in 2018. And we could see at that time the huge appetite that there was in Canada amongst investors for the sector. And so we decided to explore it, and the more we realized that cannabis represented and represents a real growth opportunity. It's not just a fad, and we heard Sam talking about that earlier on. And we figured that it would come to Europe, and that we could act as a catalyst and pioneers in bringing it to the public markets here. And as a cash shell, it's a business that doesn't have any business of its own, if you like, and therefore we didn't have to worry ourselves about the impact on our existing business. We could take the time to see the process through and achieve something which we believe to be really worthwhile. And so we've been working with Kanabo on the transaction to acquire Kanabo, bring the two companies together for 2 years, both before and after the COVID-induced market crash that we saw last March. Things started to move faster after September, when the FCA issued their guidelines for cannabis-related businesses. And now we're nearly ready to complete the acquisition and come back to the market as Kanabo Group PLC. We recently announced the fundraising exercise, which was significantly oversubscribed, and we expect to publish a prospectus very shortly. All being well, we'll be on the market in the middle of February.
That's really exciting. Yeah, super exciting. And how do you think that investment can complement and further drive innovations in the cannabis sector forward?
Well, we've already heard from Aviu a moment ago about what new investment means to Kanabo, and about some of the innovations that we will be working on to improve user experience in medical cannabis and CBD wellness. But the whole sector needs investment to drive continuous improvement in cultivation and in processing techniques, in researching and testing formulations for medical indications, and in professionalization of the whole industry for the benefit of consumers. And as in other sectors, small companies such as Kanabo have a special role in providing the creativity, innovation, and choice to customers. And maybe as an example, sort of harking back to something that Sam also said, to an example of the impact of investment, we could think about and compare the global cotton industry with the industrial hemp industry. One industry, the cotton one, has seen decades of investment and innovation, and the other, the hemp industry, has been starved of investment through prohibition during the same period. And this is despite several natural advantages, in fact, of hemp in terms of ease of cultivation, multiple applications, and the environmental impact. So, we are looking at a business, a sector that could rival in scale something as big as the cotton industry. And so I think it's the investment can help us to unlock some of the future that is in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of, I guess, tying on from that, from your perspective, why do you think it's important for us to view investment in the cannabis space positively, and why is it such an exciting space for investors?
Well, I think fundamentally, I see investment as a force for good, and it has a potential to unify interests that might often be seen as divergent as we slowly emerge from the COVID pandemic and we get to grips with all the changes resulting from Brexit, changes that we are seeing in the UK and that others see from outside the UK. So whether you're a campaigner for social justice who worries about disadvantaged people who are unnecessarily criminalized when they seek relief from their conditions, or whether you're a consumer who wants to have natural remedies that are grown closer to home, or if you're an advocate for the sector who you know from your experience of the benefits of medical cannabis, and you want the cost to be brought down to be affordable for those in need and the products to be available through the NHS. All those perspectives, I think, are brought forward by cannabis, but also from the point of view for the economists who see an opportunity for the UK to build on its world-leading position in pharmaceutical and biotech industries and innovation within those. And then finally, well, maybe not finally, but finally on my list, if you like, is for those in government who look for job creation and future tax revenues to help balance the books. All of those stakeholders, I think, have something to gain from this sector and the investment in it. And so you asked me, why is it exciting for investors? Well, I think it's for all those reasons that I've mentioned. And investors think that we're at the beginning of something big and impactful. And I agree.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be excited about and so many reasons to view it positively. And I guess finally, how do you think investment can help patients kind of drive forward access to medical cannabis?
Well, I think the therapeutic benefits of medical cannabis are increasingly accepted by doctors, and as you mentioned some of the statistics around it, but 70 to 80% of prescriptions around the world involve the smoking of cannabis flowers, and it's effective in many instances, but it's not as measurable as doctors would like, and the quality isn't as consistent as people would like because it's an agricultural product, if you like, in its raw state. So doctors would like to prescribe tablets, but they don't work as quickly or as well. And so I think innovations such as Kanabos can help to match those requirements between the doctors and the patients. And I think as Kanabo and other companies bring more medical cannabis products to the market, there'll be greater consumer choice, facilitate the growth of specialist cannabis clinics, which can improve access and generate further data on user experience. And the profits from the sales of CBD wellness products can be fed back into research and development of medical cannabis formulations, expand the range of treatable conditions, and improve also CBD wellness products themselves. And for me, at the end of the day, improving patient access to medical cannabis is the single most important factor that will determine the size of the future market. We can expect to see future investment, I think, focused in this direction. Thanks, Katya. Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. I'd now like to introduce Robert Jaffe, who's going to be giving us an overview of the legal perspective. Robert's a partner in the London office at Ince. He specialises in life sciences and cannabis regulation for the UK and Europe. So, Robert, over the last few months, there's been plenty of important legal developments in the cannabis space. I guess starting off, could you tell us what the Canavape case was about and why it was so meaningful?
Hi, Lily. Thanks very much for having me. So the Canavape case, we had a big judgment in the European courts last year. Canavape is a CBD company based in France, and France had a restriction in place on the type of CBD that you could sell. So they didn't allow any CBD products containing extracts from the bud and the flower of the hemp plant, so the best bit basically. And Kanabo were happily selling their CBD products, which did contain extracts from those parts of the plant. Most people will agree that it's very hard to get a good quality CBD product out of the seed and the stems. So what happened was Kanabo were prosecuted under this French law. They were convicted, and understandably, they were very, very upset about it. So they got themselves a very good lawyer, Evelyn, in Paris. She's first class, and they took the case all the way to the European Court of Justice. We had the judgment come out in November, and it actually went further than we were expecting. So their argument was that the French restriction was a breach of freedom of movement of goods, which is a central tenet of the EU single market. And the court agreed. The court agreed that there was no justification for this restriction by the French authorities. They accepted that technically, by the letter of the law, CBD could be considered a narcotic in accordance with the UN Convention, but they went further and said that to class CBD as a narcotic would be against the spirit of the convention, because there was no evidence of any harm to human health and to public health. So the French government were trying to justify this restriction on the grounds of protecting public health. And, the court said, well, I'm sorry, but we've not seen any evidence to support that position. So the Kanabo guys won, which was great. And it was really important decision, because a few months previously, the European Commission had actually placed a pause on the consideration of novel food applications in Europe on the basis that they were going to reclassify CBD as a narcotic. So they were going to take it out of that food category and put it into the same category as they would treat THC, which would have been devastating for the European CBD industry as a whole. So the court decision was really welcome. It effectively undermined the European Commission's plans to reclassify CBD. And they had to fold pretty quickly thereafter, and they restarted consideration of the novel food applications pretty quickly. So credit to the Kanabo guys. They probably had this hanging over their head for years and years and years, but they knew what they were doing was right, and they stuck to their guns and they won.
I think it was a great moment for the industry, all told. I know there was a lot of celebration when that came out. So you've touched on the novel foods implications, but do you think there are any other either direct or even indirect implications of that ruling, maybe on other product categories? Or
yeah, I think what the CBD industry wants, particularly in Europe, is a clear route to compliance. We want regulations. I mean, obviously, I'm a regulatory lawyer. I'd say it was a good thing, but from a market perspective, it's really important to have a clear regulatory regime, because it creates market stability and it brings consumer confidence. And this is where perhaps the CBD industry has had some issues in the last few years. It's been highly unregulated, and whilst a lot of businesses have been happy in that respect because they've been able to make lots of money, the CMC back in 2018 did this big study. They tested 30 well-known CBD brands, and it turned out some of these brands didn't have any CBD in them at all. And that's just bad for business. That's just bad for the industry. So hopefully, this understanding of what CBD does and the benefits that people can get from it will increase. But at the same time, we want to see a clear regulatory environment so that everyone active in the sector knows how to make a compliant product.
Yeah, I definitely think a clear route to compliance it's so important, and I think these reforms are just really pushing us that bit closer towards it. So I guess moving on to one of the other big news from last year. So in December, the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs, they voted to remove cannabis from Schedule 4 of the 1961 Convention. So what do you think this symbolic acknowledgement of the medical value of cannabis is going to mean for the UK and Europe? And on that note, do you think there's further reform needed? Yeah,
so the good news kept coming. So not long after the Kanabo decision, we had the vote in the UN, and look, it was a great moment, but there was still a lot of hard work to do following on from that. The importance of the vote that was won was, there was already acceptance of the value of cannabis as a medicinal product. What the vote did is it actually removed cannabis from the category where the most harmful drugs were classed. So you've had stuff like fentanyl, heroin, all of this, incredibly strong medications, which had huge problems with addiction and that sort of thing. And cannabis was in Schedule 4, the same category, which is just bad for everybody, and particularly the medicinal cannabis business. So whilst the removal of cannabis from Schedule 4 was symbolic, it's powerful, because that classification in Schedule 4 perhaps was acting as a deterrent for countries across the globe to move on further legalization and regulation. So yeah, we were really happy to see the UN vote on that one. Would have liked to have seen them win the vote on CBD, the classification of CBD as well, but you can't have it all in one go. These things will have to take time, and we'll have to keep pushing for further good decisions in that respect.
Yeah, steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
And building on that positive theme, so the Financial Conduct Authority that now enables medical cannabis companies to list on the UK exchanges. So building on the listing experience we've just heard from Kanabo, what do you think the process is going to be for companies looking to list? And also, how can we make sure that we fully embrace this opportunity?
So again, I think it was September time last year, the FCA came out with a positive announcement in relation to companies wanting to list on the London Stock Exchange. And I don't know if it's an obvious thing to say, but for those who don't know, preparing your company to list on the stock market is hard. It is hard work. And, maybe Avihu and Andy won't admit it, but I would have no doubt that they are working day and night trying to get this right. So from a company perspective, if you are going through this process, what you need is a supportive regulator. You need oversight, but you need it to be conducted in a way that helps you and guides you through the process, rather than throwing up roadblocks at every stage. And this was the concern that we had in the UK, is that the FCA, one minute they're okay with it, the next minute they put a stop on considerations, and companies didn't know where they stood. It was very hard to get any sense out of the FCA and why they were acting in this way. So when they came out in September and said, look, we're going to allow the process to start again, we're going to consider cases on their merits on a case-by-case basis, that was really, really good news. The second part of their announcement, which was really important, was that they were commencing a guidance consultation. They were actually going to look deeply into how they could structure the process for medicinal cannabis companies to list on the London stock market, and give them, again, a clear route to compliance, a framework to work within, so that they understand what is it we need to achieve in order to reach that IPO stage. So credit to Andy and Avihu, we're all very excited for what's coming up in the next few months, and hopefully they'll be the first of many. And obviously, to list on the London Stock Exchange is incredibly prestigious. And we want to make London and the UK a really attractive jurisdiction for businesses to come and list and seek investment and expand the industry as much as possible.
For sure. So building on that UK point, can you tell us a bit about what implications or maybe disruptions Brexit's had on the supply chains, and just give us an indication of what CBD and medical cannabis operators need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of work on this, advising CBD companies in particular on the steps they can take to mitigate the supply chain disruption that we've seen from Brexit. And it's not just happening to CBD companies, it's happening to all companies, particularly those in that FMCG space, which CBD now falls squarely into. Some big criticisms of the government. First of all, a deal of this nature, and it's a thin deal, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, this is a narrow deal. Usually when a deal of this nature is agreed, and it's extremely complex, you would have a grace period, you would have an implementation period, maybe a year or something for businesses to be able to get used to it, to understand how it works. We received the guidance for the sort of new customs system on the 31st of December, so the day before it was due to come into force. So how this government expected companies to be able to get to grips with this new complex system, I don't know. What seems to have happened is that the government has trumpeted the fact that this deal is zero tariff, zero quotas. And look, don't get me wrong, credit to Boris Johnson. He's done what nobody thought he could do. He actually managed to get a deal over the line, and he managed to get it through Parliament here. So that is quite an achievement. But as I said, it's a thin deal. So what we're hoping is it's a floor. It's a floor for us to build on, for the UK and the EU to develop a sensible relationship that allows cross-border business to take place, rather than a ceiling. So currently, CBD companies are having to get used to these new customs declarations. There are rules on origin, which are incredibly complex, that we now have to look at whether these products can comply with in order to benefit from that tariff-free access. And then you've got the VAT issues. The UK is no longer part of the EU VAT regime. So companies are having to put in some time and effort and some expense getting their businesses ready to deal with this. Effectively, it's a dual incorporation, dual warehousing procedure. You're going to have your UK base of operations, and you're going to have your EU base of operations, and you'll service your UK customers from your UK base and your EU customers from your EU base. And that seems to be the best way to mitigate the disruption being caused by Brexit at the moment.
Thanks, Robert. And I'm sure some people in the audience will really appreciate those practical steps and advice you've given there. So maybe taking a bit of more of a positive spin on the Brexit situation, would you be able to give us an overview of the UK's novel food regime and how we've been able to diverge from the European procedure as a result of Brexit?
Yes, so Sam actually touched on this earlier. The UK has a newfound freedom, and I think the phrase he used was being able to act in a nimble fashion. And we've actually seen it just moving away from cannabis for the moment, but in relation to the approval of the vaccine. So the UK has been able to act unilaterally in terms of vaccine approval. It's been able to move the fastest and get ahead of everybody. The irony is it's actually under an EU regulation that the UK government approved these vaccines. So there is an EU regulation that allows emergency approval for medications for vaccines. So it was an EU regulation that allowed the UK to approve so quickly, but it was Brexit that created the political environment for the UK to be able to act on its own. So the other EU member states, they agreed to act as a bloc, and to allow the European Medicines Agency to approve vaccines on behalf of all of the EU countries. UK wasn't obliged to join that bloc because they weren't a part of the EU anymore. And so there's a clear opportunity there, a clear benefit to the UK having been able to diverge and having to be able to act unilaterally. So if the UK is going to make Brexit work for the people of this country, then they're going to have to look for more opportunities for that type of divergence, which allows them to get ahead of the game. Novel foods is a key area, and in fact, it's a bit of a shame that the media, the mainstream media, hasn't made more of the fact that the UK FSA took this step to implement a clear route to compliance for the UK, because now suddenly, overnight, with that announcement from the FSA last year, the UK suddenly became the most desirable jurisdiction to do CBD business. So whereas the UK mirrored the EU procedure for novel foods, what they did is they implemented a clear timeline, a deadline for CBD companies to achieve novel food compliance, and they set out a clear route on how to do that. And I'm sure Clifton will touch on it a bit more after me, in terms of his company's journey with novel food compliance. I was very much against the novel food regime, but once you realised that this is what was happening, you had to get on board with it. And the vast majority of companies in the UK have done so. I am still being contacted by some people who haven't got their novel food compliance in place, and it's getting late in the day. So if you haven't dealt with it now, I would be strongly advising you to get on board and find that solution and get moving on this issue.
Lovely. Thank you, Robert. And thanks for summarising those issues, which are really complex for a lot of people to get their heads around. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. That was really interesting and super helpful. Now I'd like to introduce Clifton Flack, who has over 25 years of experience in strategic and brand marketing. He co-founded Canna Tech Co. in 2015, driving Israeli cannabis innovation and investment. And in 2017, Clifton founded Ciitech, aiming to create a stronger consumer base for the cannabis brand through evidence-based innovation. So welcome, Clifton. I guess my first question would be whether you could tell us a bit about the opportunity that brands and medicines have in the sector, and perhaps how opportunities differ for CBD brands versus cannabis medicines. Well, I think you're on mute at the moment.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Really interesting things that everyone for me. And thanks to everyone who's still here to listen to me. So I think the best way to answer that in part is the story where I came from medical cannabis activism in Israel.
I'm not sure if it's just me. Your microphone's going a bit funny. I'm not sure.
Same for me. Yeah.
Maybe try turning it off and on again. Just sounded a bit funny.
Hello.
Yeah, that's much better.
Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, so I think the easiest way to answer, the differences or the opportunities with CBD and medical cannabis is the reason that I moved from medical cannabis 4 years ago into CBD, and that was that the opportunity for CBD is now. There's consumers that have the desire for the product, and there's jurisdictions where you can sell the product. The opportunities for medical cannabis are still a little bit down the road. Many countries are open and have opened up. America, obviously, Canada has come a long way, and England has come the last 12 months, even with Corona, has come a long way. I think they have over 3,000 medical cannabis patients have been onboarded in the past year. But I think the significance is, in 2019, when the Canadians first had their stock market bubble burst, and the industry was forced, I guess, to take a look at itself and look at the opportunities and where they've been going. And what we saw was a slight move towards CBD, recognizing there is revenues there today. I think the significant differences when you're talking about a CBD market or a medical cannabis market is the point of service. For CBD, there's no doctors involved. So for me, 4 years ago, moving into CBD or cannabinoids, but in a food supplement environment, the attraction was to avoid regulation. I think as Robert was saying before, we all need and we all want regulation, a clear path to solid regulation. But what's happening in medical cannabis is we're kind of creating or trying to create a third healthcare leg. You've got your pharmaceutical healthcare, your health and wellness, and now we have this amazing medical cannabis that requires its own reform and its own way of being created and regulated and distributed and prescribed. And that's inherently problematic, and that's been inherently problematic in every country. The opportunity with CBD is there is no doctors who are prescribing. And there's no doctors or even right now pharmacists who are even recommending a specific brand or specific product. With CBD, it's 100% a consumer market. And to me, as a marketer, as your introduction to me, I'm 25 years in marketing. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor. I've got lots of buzzwords, and it's an amazing industry where you can meet lots of scientists and medical professionals, but where we are is a brand industry. And when you're building brands, you're all about building trust. So that's really the essence of where the opportunity for CBD is. And it's been said before this evening, I think we all know that the CBD market suffered a lot from bad press, from, as Robert was saying, reports have come out many times in England and then many times in America, where samples have been tested and there's been zero to small amounts of CBD in a product. The industry the consumers need to know there's products they can trust. And that's, I guess, the biggest challenge, but it's the biggest opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a real responsibility for the industry to create that trust with its consumers. Now, I know Robert kind of touched on this a bit, but could you explain kind of what the novel food regulations are in the UK around CBD? Yeah, kind of will the UK's separate novel food process have a positive impact on developing the UK CBD industry?
I think this is one of the single biggest opportunities for the UK in this market. Novel food is, I'm sure most people here know what novel food is, but this is a catalogue effectively created in 1997, and any product not in the market, not known to the market prior to that, would require sufficient toxicology and stability studies to prove its safety. And at the end of the day, this is what we're all about. We're all about safety. Safety and repeatability. When you submit your product, your CBD product, for novel food approval, what the outcome is effectively a rubber stamp saying your product is safe, it's been standardized, it's repeatable, because that same formula that you've got your approval from has to be the same product that's supplied to customers month after month, year after year. And that's the difference between CBD right now and medical cannabis right now, where, as Andy was saying before, we're still in a situation where there's flowers being sold, and flowers, it's an agricultural product. It's almost impossible to repeat harvest after harvest. So what novel food does, it forces us into this mold of creating standardized, repeatable, and more importantly, safe products. So what we saw a year ago, finally, was that the UK took a stance that they would begin to enforce novel food. I think many people in the industry, me included, happen. I was against it myself, but as Robert said, when we all realised this is going to happen and what the outcome would be, it's something you have to get behind. You can try and fight these things, but at the end of the day, if you look at it just with just a common sense hat on, when you're selling a product, you need to know every single compound that's in there. If you're selling it through a pharmacy, the pharmacist wants to know every single compound that's in there. And if you're not sure of a specific compound, how it may interact with another compound, then it's difficult, morally, let alone under a regulatory framework, to sell that product. So we're in a situation where novel food is going to force a number of things. And it's going to force, by regulation, the maximum dose. I think we're going to see a maximum pack size of CBD. But what it's also going to do is it's going to effectively, I believe, remove full spectrum and high strength oils from the market. Simply for that reason, that when you submit and you do your toxicology, it's very difficult to consistently show or answer the questions: does CBG interact with the CBD? Do the terpenes interact with that compound? So what we see is that I believe is that next month, the early or the initial companies that get their validation will be companies that have submitted isolate or broad spectrum based products. And then what we're going to have is the UK will be effectively the first country in the world to have a clear outline, a clear guideline of how to sell CBD. And that's a significant advantage for us.
Yes, super significant. And I guess along those lines, what changes in the UK regulations would you like to see to further encourage innovation and investment into the UK market?
I think a lot of it is mindset. The fact that we heard Spinnaker and Kanabo, we hope will be public within a couple of months. It's really more of I believe the attitude of investors and campaigns like the New Leaf Opportunities. It's raising awareness that cannabis is not scary. There's different elements. CBD is far less scary from a regulatory perspective. When you've not got prohibited substances or controlled substances, it's an easier pill to swallow, if you excuse the pun. But it's really about raising awareness, and eventually, I think it's a pathway we're on. Eventually, it's legalization. Once we get to legalization, is when we're really going to see the markets explode. And I think it was touched on earlier. One of the big roadblocks for medical cannabis in most countries, at the end of the day, has been doctors' reluctance to put pen to paper and prescribe what's effectively a bag of weed, marijuana, effectively. And until we can move beyond that, then we're going to have that doctor's reluctance. But I think what we're seeing in the UK, which is really significant, is the proliferation of clinics. And as opposed to the American model where it's dispensaries, I think the model of a clinic where the product isn't necessarily prescribed, but under a framework where it can be sold under supervision. I think this is where we're going to see medical cannabis move towards, and CBD will remain in the cosmetics and the purely health and wellness sectors.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess finally, what implications do you think Brexit has on the CBD opportunity in the UK?
Well, I think, without getting political, I think this is one of those Brexit moments. It's a Brexit moment and it's a COVID moment. I think every country right now is looking for something economically to help them out of COVID. I think Britain, UK has got an incredible advantage with Brexit, and then specifically with novel food. Because there is that irony that we've taken almost one of the last things we've done as an EU member is to adopt the EU mandate on novel food. And for sure, all of Europe are looking to the UK come March 31st. Come March 31st, nobody knows right now, nobody knows. And anybody that says they do is lying. Nobody knows what's going to happen. No one knows how they're going to enforce it, when they're going to enforce it, who they're going to enforce against. It's going to be incredibly difficult. Without doubt, trading standards don't have resource. They don't have the resources to take product off shelf. And there's lots of products that must come off the shelf come March 31st, as Robert said. There's lots of companies that have done nothing about novel food. Their products will become instantly illegal and instantly enforceable. But even to what degree, we don't know. But the rest of Europe is looking, and I would expect that as the year goes on, we're going to see country by country. I don't believe we're going to see an EU-wide position taken, but country by country, we'll see somewhere, and maybe Germany will be the first, maybe France shortly after, that will adopt very similar guidelines to the UK. And I think then you have that real opportunity for the UK, because across Europe, there are no strong CBD brands. There's a handful of established, but there's no strong players, and the market is far less educated than the UK. It's a much smaller market in the UK. Right now, the UK, 300 million, I think, as you mentioned at the beginning, is bigger than the rest of Europe combined for CBD. So as that market opens up, consumers are looking for strong brands, compliant brand. The supply chain is looking for compliant brands. I think we're going to see some of those UK brands heading across the channel to Europe and really dominating.
Yeah, it's super exciting, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what the CBD opportunity will bring to the UK. But yeah, thank you so much, Clifton, for answering those questions and giving us a really good overview of the CBD opportunity.
Thank you, Clifton. I'm now going to hand over to Paul North, the director at Volteface, for some closing remarks. Paul is a criminologist and addiction specialist with 9 years experience working in the drug treatment sector. During this time, he's managed services, delivered bespoke addiction training programs for the public sector, and lectured at universities. Paul first joined Volteface in 2017 as a policy advisor and was promoted to director following the Charlotte Caldwell campaign in 2018. Paul regularly comments in the media on drug treatment, cannabis use amongst young people, mental health, and drugs education. Alongside his Volteface work, Paul is a director at Drugs and Me, a social enterprise that provides services centered around drug harm reduction.
Hi Lily, how's it going? I think you have a question for me. You don't have to ask it, I could ask.
No, sorry, Paul.
It's all right, mate, don't worry.
What opportunities do you see from the growing CBD and medical cannabis market in the UK?
Cheers, Lily. It's always hard going last, isn't it? Because I have to fight the clock and I have to struggle with the fact that all the good points have been made. And I know you want to ask some questions, so I'll answer this and maybe give some closing remarks, and you can ask some questions. But what I'd like to shed light on really is something that Katia mentioned in her opening talk, but often something that's missed in this discussion, and that is the issue of stigma. So I spent just over 9 years working in drug treatment services, And over those 9 years, I saw firsthand the impact that stigma has on cannabis users. And I've also now worked in the policy space for 4 years, seen the impact that stigma has on the policy field. But to kind of go into the wider impact of stigma on people, it kind of manifests in a number of ways. What I saw when I worked in treatment, it would deter people from getting support. It would deter people from having honest conversations about cannabis. It would deter young people from getting support. It would shame medical cannabis patients for using a drug that was incredibly beneficial to them. It would just broadly lead to judgments and unhealthy stereotypes of consumers of cannabis. And what I've seen in policy over the past 4 years is it also hinders sensible, evidence-based reform. Stigma leaves people with an impression that here in the UK, cannabis consumption is simply about smoking a joint with lots of really strong cannabis in. And we come across this, we see this, whenever myself or other members of the Volteface team, we've spoke to the public, we've done loads of focus groups. And this always comes up whenever you speak to somebody about, what do you think about cannabis? And they'll say, it's just people smoking really strong joints. And this is something that's got better in time, as we've seen the reforms that are taking place globally, reforms that are taking place in the UK. That obviously is addressed to some extent, but that stigma still exists. And I'm really glad Sam, in his excellent opening speech, mentioned the trip that we filmed with the BBC, where we took Norman Lamb, David Lammy, Jonathan Ginogly over to Canada. And really the part that Sam mentioned, that was the most powerful part of the trip. When Norman Lamb and David and Jonathan went into the first time we took them into a dispensary, a legally operating shop in downtown Toronto, they just walked in and were like, oh, this is absolutely not what we thought it would be. This is really normal. Like, there are so many products available and they all look quite safe, and there's a really friendly staff chatting us through everything. And what do you mean you're not just selling really strong weed? And that I mean, we'd obviously briefed them before. We've been speaking to those politicians for a long time, and we still have excellent relationships with them. They kind of knew what they were going in for, but it's still, despite that briefing and despite having reasonable knowledge of the market, walking into that shop and seeing that range of products, seeing CBD, seeing medical cannabis, seeing recreational cannabis, seeing it all different forms, was really, really, really powerful. And that part of the documentary where Norman just gets some oil, that was a pretty wild moment. I'll never forget that, because none of us expected it was going to happen. Norman was just like, I'm going to buy some. I'm just going to get some and I'll take it. And then the journalist was like, and what, let's film it. And that, that was the first time a politician ever openly taken drugs on a TV program. It's really powerful, and that normalization is really powerful back home. That documentary was seen, well, the piece alone just on the BBC website was seen by over 2 million people. It's really powerful, just showing people it's completely normal. Norman had that experience, as Sam mentioned, and he just had a normal night's sleep. And that, for me, is a really important point that sometimes gets missed. It's the normalization, the recognition of the diversity that's really important, and it has wide-reaching consequences. Over the past year, I've had conversations with clinicians who work in treatment services, and they're genuinely interested in exploring the value which cannabis brings to people who access the services. And what I mean by that is there are genuine conversations around the benefits of medicinal cannabis for vulnerable cohorts who are drinking heavily, using excessive amounts of heroin. Clinicians are now looking at that drug and going, how can that help that cohort, which is amazing. That would be an amazing opportunity that exists. And from someone who for 9 years worked so hard with that cohort, cannabis could bring a lot. So the opportunities which arise from thriving, sensibly regulated markets are vast. It allows us to tackle that stigma. It increases our understanding of cannabis and gives us that recognition of those wide-reaching benefits of the plant. And also, as I've mentioned previously, from a campaigning perspective, which Volteface is, campaigning advocacy vehicle, it's really, really important. That diversification of cannabis moves us beyond the debate where cannabis has been at. When I first started Volteface 4 years ago, the debate was very much, should we legalize cannabis? Do our drug policies work? And the debate is that we're so beyond that now. In 4 years, we're not having that discussion anymore. It shouldn't be a discussion of do our drug policies work. It's about what can we do better. It's moved forward so much, and I think that's a good thing. We need to start discussing, celebrating, highlighting the benefits of innovation and growth, moving us beyond that that discussion that is kind of rooted in stigma and fear. And you know, I'm really pleased with everything everybody said, in particular Sam kind of outlining that innovation and the opportunities are in front of us. And that's why we started this campaign, because there is an opportunity to raise this awareness. You know, there is a public appetite to be better educated on cannabis innovations, CBD and medical cannabis. There's a political appetite to explore economic opportunities that exist, and there's an interest from the media. I was thinking earlier, and Ant will remember these days, but over the past sort of 3 years, in terms of getting the press and the media to cover cannabis, we've had to deal with a Brexit, snap election, a leadership collapse, Brexit chat again, another leadership collapse, Brexit, COVID, now COVID, and some more Brexit, which is loud. You know, these things are loud, they're very noisy, it can feel like that's all the media ever talks about. But what we've noticed working in the policy space is it creates, you know, these distractions create real appetite for the media. And I think as COVID, hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, reduces and the vaccines kick in, I think there's going to be a really, really strong appetite from the media to explore some of these opportunities. So maybe, Lily, before I pass back to you, I'll just do a few closing comments. And there are a few questions that I've seen coming in that yourself and Katya might want to distribute out. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of the sponsors of the New Leaf Opportunities campaign. So Spinnaker, Kanabo, Ciitech, Ince, Hanway Associates. You know, at Volteface, we believe our role is to work positively with the industry to highlight key areas of thought leadership in which we think we can achieve meaningful change and engagement, both with the government, the media, and wider society. As Katya and Lily have mentioned, we've got a wide range of events on the horizon, media coverage, reports, and political allies lined up in the next few months. So do keep an eye on our Twitter, our Facebook, our website. And if you'd like to work with Volteface and learn more about how you can support the New Leaf Opportunities campaign, or just other areas of our thought leadership work, just get in touch. When I've finished speaking, I'll put my contact details in the chat. And obviously, thanks to everybody that's attended. We sold so many tickets for this. It's great to see so many people turn up. So thanks for everybody's attendance and engagement. But now I'll pass over to Lily and Katya. Hopefully, if we've got time to maybe, we've got 2 minutes. Maybe we've not got time, but I'll pass back to you guys to round things up. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that really interesting talk. I think it's it's super important to highlight the factor that stigma plays in all of this. So thank you for wrapping all of that up. I'm not sure, we've got a couple of questions for the panelists. I'm not sure if we've got enough time to go through them. Perhaps, I don't know if we could take one or two. What do you think, Lily?
Yeah, let's do one or two. So there's one question here for Andy, which is asking, are European medical cannabis companies being ignored or sidelined with all the investor appetite and interest in the US at the moment?
Thanks. I think there is a big difference between the European market and the US market because of the difference in the focus in Europe on medical side and the market being very much dominated in the US and North America by the recreational side. I think what I understand part of the question that was asked also referred to whether companies should remain private or whether it's listing. And Robert touched on this in his remarks. I mean, being a public company, becoming a public is not a panacea. And I don't know about day and night, but we certainly work very hard on bringing the market. It does have a role. I think public companies have a role to play in providing a profile and trust for consumers and investors. But there are lots of companies who can get quite big being private. And if you don't, and I think, you know, to be flippant about it, if you don't need public money, don't take it. You can work perfectly well with private money.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. I think we're going to wrap up now as we are very tight for time. But with the questions that we've had from the audience, we've got some really good questions. So we're going to try and answer them over social media through some videos and threads. So we'll keep you guys posted with that. But with that said, we'd like to round off today's event. So I'd like to thank all of our attendees for coming. It's great to see such a great turnout. And as I mentioned, this was our first and our launch event for the New Leaf Opportunities campaign. So we'll be holding a series of other events in the coming months for the campaign with kind of more specific, around more specific topics around investment, innovations, and listings. So we've got lots of exciting things to come from New Leaf Opportunities. So definitely stay tuned for updates over Twitter, Facebook, and our website. And yeah, so thank you very much everyone for attending, and yeah, and have a great evening.